Watching the debate over Common Core, you'd think this proposed reform is something new and unique, but it's not. As Andrew Ferguson points out in this Weekly Standard cover story, Common Core happened just 8 years after President George W. Bush and Ted Kennedy got together to give us another revolutionary approach to learning, No Child Left Behind.
In that box is the bill. I don't intend to read it all.
He signed it without reading it, and the crowd cheered. But the law promise sounds familiar.
In return for federal dollars, design accountability systems.
No Child Left Behind came just 8 years after President Clinton thought of Goals 2000, a nationwide school reform that would
set world-class education standards.
The crowd applauded that too. But Goals 2000 was a reworking of a school reform plan called America 2000, pushed by the first President Bush.
Our national education strategy.
He said it was revolutionary.
To make America all that it can be.
The president said he wanted to be called the Education President, and the cameras followed him into a classroom.
What's your name?
Doesn't this look familiar too? Only 7 years before President Bush's national education strategy, President Reagan released something similar.
A national campaign to restore excellence in American education.
I wonder why that was needed. Didn't President Carter restore excellence with his national program?
It will open up for the first time some very substantial benefits for our country.
Carter created the Federal Department of Education, which promised to fix America's education problem.
I'm determined that we're going to cut out unnecessary forms, applications, red tape, regulations that have been an obstacle in time.
Please, for 40 years, the education bureaucrats have added unnecessary forms, applications, and red tape. Education reform is like an itch that reformers just can't scratch. And why should they? Because a new education reform brings them money. And since the reforms never work, the last reform creates the need for more reform and more money. America now spends 3 times what we spent when Jimmy Carter fixed the problem by creating the Department of Education. Triple the money, no improvement. Well, improvement for professional education researchers. As money pours in from the government and foundations, an army of these educrats found work as lobbyists, psychologists, education theorists at grad schools of education, foundations, and government education departments. So great a mass of these specialists cannot be kept idle. They will find something to do. And so, after 40 years of failed reforms, they brought us another Common Core.
I believe Common Core state standards may prove to be amongst the most important things to happen to public education in America since Brown versus Board of Education.
This time it'll work, they say. In his article, Ferguson points out that the world of education reform is a cozy fraternity. One foundation gives a grant to another foundation that studies the work of the first foundation. These days, the fraternity feeds off the wealth of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Ferguson says Common Core wouldn't exist without that money. Bill puts me to sleep when he talks, so let's listen to Melinda Gates explain that Common Core will tell teachers things like,
these are the things that I need to know that my students learned this year.
But as we saw, those are standards only an educrat could love or understand. One size fits all may be a mockery to people who understand the harm done by central planning, but to experts at foundations, one size fits all is often the ideal. Their findings are choked with charts, graphs, algorithms. $300 million keeps a lot of experts busy. All of this money down the drain allows Common Core advocates to say, correctly, that the Federal Department of Education didn't produce those Common Core standards. No, our nation's educrats produced them. But this is a distinction without a difference. So, now the school year begins. Common Core will be tested on your kids. Then, new tests will reveal, oops, students still are not learning. So the educrats will come up with a new national reform. This one with teeth, accountability, high-stakes consequences. A new president will fund it with your money and declare it's a national priority. After all, she'll want to be called the education president too. But don't to spare.